The diner was almost empty when the rain began to fall, hard enough to blur the lights outside. Clara wiped the counter for the last time that night, thinking no one was watching. She didn't see the man at the corner booth, tall, expensive suit, the kind who never stayed long. Her stomach growled softly, echoing in the quiet room. There were untouched plates left on table 3, a steak, half-eaten fries, still warm. She hesitated, then slowly sat down, her fingers trembling as she picked up a fry. It wasn't hunger that made her cry, it was shame. The man stood up suddenly, his chair scraping the floor. The sound startled her so badly she dropped the fork, her heart leaping into her throat. He stared at her, his jaw tight, eyes unreadable. "You're eating leftovers?" he asked, voice sharp but low. She froze, unable to speak, cheeks burning with humiliation. The rain pounded harder, drowning the silence between them. She whispered, "It's been a long day." He walked closer, the scent of his cologne mixing with the smell of fried onions. There was no softness in his gaze, only curiosity, and maybe something colder. "You shouldn't do that," he said quietly. "It looks desperate." Her throat tightened, tears threatening to fall, but she refused to look away. "I am desperate," she said simply, her voice trembling but honest. Something flickered in his eyes then, something like guilt, but too brief to name. He turned away, as if he couldn't bear to see her anymore. As he reached for his coat, a thunderclap shook the diner, and the lights flickered out. For a few seconds, they stood in the darkness together, the world outside swallowed by rain. When the backup light kicked in, he was still watching her, not with disgust, but confusion. "You shouldn't have to live like this," he murmured, half to himself. Clara frowned, unsure if he meant it kindly or cruelly. "You don't even know me," she replied. He smiled faintly. "Maybe I should." Then he pulled something from his briefcase, a small envelope, crisp and white. He placed it gently on the counter between them. "What's this?" she asked, still wary, still hurt. "An offer," he said simply. "But not for the diner." He met her eyes then, and she saw it clearly. Pity, but mixed with something else. Something deeper, darker, and entirely unpredictable. And in that instant, she realized her life was about to change. Clara stared at the envelope, unsure if she should even touch it. The way the realtor's hand lingered near it made her feel like it carried more than money. Maybe judgment, maybe danger. She wiped her palms on her apron, her chest tight with confusion. "What kind of offer?" she asked quietly, afraid of the answer. He didn't sit back down. He just leaned on the counter, studying her as if she were a puzzle he couldn't solve. "It's a job," he finally said. "Something temporary, but it could change your life." She almost laughed, the kind of laugh people use when they're too tired to believe in hope. "A job?" she repeated, skeptical. "You think I can't find one myself?" His lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. "No, I think you already have one. I'm asking if you'd like something better." She hesitated, her stomach twisting. She didn't trust him. Men like him never looked twice at women like her unless they wanted something. Still, something about the way he said better stayed in her mind. "Why me?" she asked, forcing her voice steady. He looked past her, toward the empty tables and flickering lights. "Because I see something you don't," he said. "And because I owe someone a favor." The rain softened outside, leaving a hush that felt almost heavy. She reached for the envelope, opening it slowly. Inside was a business card, elegant and embossed. Ethan Hayes, Realty Development Group. And beneath it, a check, already signed, blank in the amount. Her breath caught. "What is this?" she whispered. He stepped closer, voice calm. A gesture of goodwill. "I buy properties. You work here. You know this place better than anyone. I want your help." She blinked in disbelief. "Help you do what?" His silence stretched too long. Finally, he said, "Tear it down." Her chair scraped back, loud in the quiet room. "Tear it down," she repeated, voice shaking. "You mean this diner?" He didn't flinch. "It's just a building, Clara. Old, unprofitable. You could start over somewhere new." Her pulse pounded in her ears, part rage, part heartbreak. "This place fed me when I had nothing," she said. "My mother worked here. My life is in these walls." Ethan sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose like a man trying to reason with a child. "And now it's keeping you trapped," he said softly. "You deserve more than crumbs from other people's plates." The words cut deep, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Clara turned away, blinking back tears she refused to let fall. He slid the envelope closer. "Think about it," he said quietly. "It's not just money. It's freedom." Then he put on his coat and left, the doorbell's chime echoing like a question she couldn't answer. She stood there, staring at the check, the card, the crumbs still left on the table. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the storm inside her had just begun. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she felt that this man's offer wasn't chance. It was destiny testing her heart. Clara barely slept that night. The sound of rain lingered in her mind long after it stopped, replaying alongside the echo of Ethan's words. "It's not just money. It's freedom." She sat by the window of her small apartment, the diner's neon sign faint in the distance like a heartbeat she couldn't turn off. The envelope lay on the table beside her, untouched now but impossible to ignore. It wasn't the money that haunted her. It was the idea of betraying something sacred. Eleanor's diner wasn't just a job. It was her last link to her mother, to the promise she made when life broke them both. But Ethan's voice kept coming back, confident, reasonable, and cruelly persuasive. At dawn, she returned to the diner early, as she always did, unlocking the door with steady hands that didn't feel steady inside. She made coffee, wiped down the tables, and tried to convince herself nothing had changed. But everything had. When the first light hit the counter, she saw her reflection in the stainless steel, tired eyes, messy hair, and that flicker of doubt she'd never known before. She whispered to herself, "You're not for sale," but it didn't sound convincing anymore. She thought of Ethan's suit, his easy tone, the way he looked at her not with contempt, but with pity. She hated that pity more than hunger. By mid-morning, customers filled the diner again, truckers, locals, and familiar faces. Clara smiled, took orders, poured coffee. But each time she reached for a plate, she saw that blank check flash in her mind like a secret she couldn't hide. She noticed Ethan's car outside around noon, sleek, black, perfectly out of place in her world. He didn't come in, just sat there, watching the diner through the rain-streaked glass. Her chest tightened. "He's waiting," she muttered. But for what? Her answer, or her surrender? Finally, near closing time, she couldn't take it anymore. She wiped her hands, stormed out into the drizzle, and walked straight to his car. He rolled down the window, calm as ever. "Change your mind?" he asked, almost kindly. "No," she snapped. "But I'm not your project either." He studied her, unbothered. "You think pride will feed you? Keep you warm?" She hesitated, water dripping from her hair, and whispered, "At least it's mine." Something in his face shifted then. Not anger, not amusement, but something weary, old, like a man who'd once stood in the same rain. He didn't argue. He just reached into his pocket and handed her a card, different from before. "This isn't about money anymore," he said softly. "You should see something before you decide." She frowned. "What is it?" "An address," he replied. "Come tomorrow. Noon." Then he drove off, leaving her standing alone in the mist, cold, uncertain, and trembling with a strange, unwanted curiosity. The next day, Clara woke before sunrise, her chest tight with nerves. She told herself she wasn't going, that she'd burn the card, forget Ethan Hayes, and move on. But as she scrubbed dishes at the diner, she caught herself glancing at the clock every few minutes. The numbers crawled toward noon, pulling her with them like gravity. By 11:30, she couldn't pretend anymore. She grabbed her coat, slipped the card into her pocket, and told the cook she'd be back in a bit. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to know. The address led her out of town, past the highway, to an old industrial area she hadn't visited in years. Most of the buildings were boarded up, their windows shattered, the ghosts of better times lingering in the silence. At the end of the street stood one structure that still looked alive, a massive, half-renovated warehouse with a sign that read Hayes Redevelopment Group. Her stomach twisted. She hesitated at the gate, ready to turn back, when she saw him, Ethan, standing at the door, waiting as if he'd known she would come. He wore no suit this time, just a gray sweater and rolled-up sleeves, his expression unreadable. "Right on time," he said quietly. "I didn't say I was coming," she replied, her voice more defensive than she meant. He shrugged. "You didn't have to. People like you always do." "People like me?" she snapped. His eyes softened. "People who can't walk away from a question." That disarmed her, because he was right. She hated not knowing, hated unsolved things. He motioned toward the entrance. Come inside. You should see where the money really goes. Reluctantly, she followed him into the cavernous building. Inside, the space was filled with scaffolding, boxes, and workers, but not the kind she expected. Young men and women in worn clothes were painting, sweeping, and measuring walls. Some looked barely out of high school. Others were older, faces lined with exhaustion. "What is this?" she asked, walking slowly past them. Ethan didn't answer right away. He pointed to a banner hanging over a half-built doorway. "The Haven Project, housing for those starting over." Clara froze. "You're building shelters?" "Not shelters," he said, his tone calm but precise. "Homes. For people who've lost theirs." Her throat tightened as she looked around again. The workers weren't employees. They were residents in progress. People trying to rebuild something, maybe the same way she was. He continued, "My father owned this block once. He built it on greed. I'm trying to build something different." She turned to him, confused. "So why the diner? Why destroy something that still works?" He exhaled, long and heavy, as if that question had been waiting for years. "Because your diner sits on land my father once stole," he said softly. "And I'm here to make that right." Clara blinked, trying to make sense of his words. "Stole?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you talking about?" Ethan nodded toward a dusty corner of the warehouse where old files lay stacked in boxes. He walked over, pulling one from the pile, then handed her a yellowed folder. Inside were faded documents, deeds, purchase records, and handwritten notes bearing his family's name. On one page, she saw it clearly: property transfer, Eleanor's Diner, acquired 1973. Next to the signature of his father, another scrawl she recognized, her mother's. She felt her stomach twist, as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "My mother didn't sell that land," Clara murmured. "She lost it. The bank took it when she couldn't pay the loans." Ethan nodded slowly. "That's what the papers say, yes. But they don't tell the truth." He turned the next page, revealing a letter, creased and fragile from age. "This is from the man who brokered the deal," he said softly. "He admitted years later that my father forced her hand. She didn't know the bank anything. He forged the debt to take it." The words blurred before her eyes, the weight of injustice falling on her chest like bricks. Her mother's tired eyes flashed in her memory. All those nights she cried, believing she'd failed. Clara sank onto a crate, shaking. "You mean she lost everything because of him?" Ethan nodded, guilt flickering behind his calm expression. "She wasn't the only one," he said quietly. "My father destroyed families for land. He built his fortune on other people's homes." She stared at him, her hands trembling around the papers. "And now you're here to do what?" "Make peace by tearing it down again." His jaw tightened. "I came to return what was stolen." Clara looked up sharply. "Then why offer to buy it?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Because I didn't think you'd ever talk to me if I told you the truth." For the first time, his confidence cracked, and she saw something raw in him. Regret, deep and real. "I've been buying up all the land my father took," he said, "giving it back to the families it belonged to." She stared at him in disbelief. "You think money can fix that?" He shook his head. "No, but rebuilding something good on the ruins might." Her pulse quickened. She didn't know whether to believe him or hate him for being part of the same name that destroyed her family. But inside her chest, something began to stir, the faintest flicker of understanding. He crouched down in front of her, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Clara, I didn't come to destroy your diner. I came to rebuild it, for you." She blinked, stunned. "What?" He handed her another file, blueprints this time, with her name written at the top. "Not a chain restaurant, not a development. Your diner, expanded, renovated, and owned by you." She stared at the paper, unable to breathe. "Why?" she whispered. Ethan hesitated, then said something that would haunt her for days. "Because I've spent my life trying to repay debts that aren't mine, and yours is the last one left." Clara sat frozen, staring at the blueprints in her lap, the paper trembling slightly in her hands. She didn't know whether to throw them back in his face or cry. Her diner, her mother's diner, reborn, rebuilt, returned to her. It sounded like a dream carved from guilt. "You think you can make it right by writing checks and drawing plans?" she asked quietly. Ethan's expression softened, but his shoulders sagged with weariness. "No, I think I can try." "Try," she repeated bitterly. Do you even know what it's like to lose everything? He met her eyes, and for the first time, she saw the shadow of a man who did. My father didn't just ruin other families, he said after a long pause. He ruined ours too. My mother left when I was 12. Couldn't stand to live under the same roof with him anymore. Clara looked up, caught off guard by the tremor in his voice. I spent years hating her for that, he continued. But when I got older, I found out the truth. He reached into his coat and pulled out an old black and white photograph, a woman standing in front of Eleanor's diner. She was young, smiling, flower on her apron. And beside her, holding her hand, was a boy, Ethan. My mother worked for yours, he said quietly, before my father forced her to leave. Clara's breath caught as she studied the photo, tracing the faces with trembling fingers. The woman's eyes were kind, tired but full of light. She told me stories about your mother, Ethan said softly. Said she was the kind of woman who could make a stranger feel seen. He gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. She used to bake her favorite pie every Friday. Said it smelled like home. Clara's throat tightened. Apple cinnamon, she whispered. Mom made it every week until the bank took the kitchen from her. Ethan nodded. It was my mother's recipe too. I guess some things don't die, they just wait. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, and sacred somehow. She wanted to hate him, to keep her pain clean, untainted by sympathy. But the edges of anger began to blur, replaced by something more complicated. Ethan's voice was low now, raw with honesty. When I saw you eating leftovers that night, I didn't see desperation, Clara. I saw her, my mother, trying to keep her dignity when the world turned its back. She swallowed hard, blinking against tears. Then why didn't you say something? Because I didn't deserve to, he said. Not until I faced what my family did. He looked at her, eyes tired but sincere. I didn't come to buy your silence. I came to earn your forgiveness. Her lips parted, but no sound came out, only a deep, aching breath. She rose from the crate, folding the photo gently and handing it back to him. I don't know if forgiveness works like that, she said softly. He nodded. Neither do I. The rain outside began again, tapping against the warehouse windows like an old song. Clara turned toward the door. I need time, she murmured. A lot of it. Ethan nodded once, not trying to stop her. Take all you need. And as she stepped out into the rain, she realized, for the first time in years, she wasn't carrying her pain alone. The bell above the diner door jingled softly as Clara stepped inside, drenched from the rain. The familiar scent of coffee and pie wrapped around her, but it felt different tonight, heavier somehow. Every booth was empty, every table wiped clean, the silence pressing like a memory too loud to ignore. She walked behind the counter, her fingers brushing the chipped surface where her mother used to rest her elbows. For years, she'd kept this place alive out of stubbornness, not hope. But now, the truth Ethan had revealed churned inside her, like the ground shifting beneath something sacred. The diner wasn't just her inheritance. It was also a stolen piece of someone else's sin. She turned on the old jukebox, though she didn't know why. Maybe to fill the silence, maybe to summon ghosts. The soft hum of a country tune filled the room, slow and nostalgic. As the music played, her eyes wandered to the corner booth, her mother's favorite spot. She used to sit there at dawn, sipping coffee while the world still slept, whispering prayers no one heard. Clara slid into that same booth and closed her eyes, remembering the sound of her mother's laughter. It had been strong once, like sunlight through rain. She wondered what her mother would say if she knew the truth now. Would she forgive Ethan for his father's sins? Would she forgive Clara for almost selling the last piece of their legacy out of despair? The questions felt too heavy to answer, so she reached for something she hadn't touched in years, her mother's old recipe book. It sat on a high shelf behind the counter, its cover worn, pages yellowed, corners stained with syrup and grease. She opened it slowly, running her fingers over the handwriting that felt like a hug. In the margin of one page, written faintly in pencil, were 4 words, "Don't let them take it." Clara's eyes filled with tears. Her mother had known. Somehow, she'd known. The diner suddenly felt alive again, as if her mother's spirit had been waiting for this moment. Clara turned the page and saw another note, tucked between recipes. It wasn't her mother's handwriting this time. The ink was newer, the strokes heavier. For Eleanor. I'm sorry. I couldn't stop him. Clara's breath caught. It was signed, M.H. Margaret Hayes. Ethan's mother. Her knees went weak. The photo, the connection, the guilt, it all circled back here, hidden inside the very book that had survived everything. The two women had been bound together long before their children met. And now, somehow, Clara felt their unfinished story resting in her hands. She whispered into the quiet diner, "Maybe it's time we both stop hiding." The words sounded strange but freeing. She grabbed her coat again, heart pounding, and stepped into the rain once more. There was someone she needed to see, not to yell, not to accuse, but to finally listen. The road back to the warehouse shimmered under the streetlights, slick with puddles and reflection. Somewhere inside her, she felt the shift, from anger to understanding, from victim to witness. And for the first time in her life, she wanted to know the whole story, no matter how much it hurt. The rain hadn't stopped, but Clara didn't care. She pushed through it, soaked and trembling, her mind spinning with the discovery. When she reached the warehouse, Ethan was still there, sitting on a crate, staring at the ground like he'd been waiting for something that might never come. She slammed the recipe book down in front of him. "You didn't tell me your mother worked here," she said, her voice cracking between anger and disbelief. Ethan looked up, startled, then saw the open page, the handwriting, the signature, and something in his expression broke. "She left that behind?" he asked softly, his voice barely audible. Clara crossed her arms, shivering. "She left a confession. She tried to warn my mother. She tried to stop him." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through the rain. Ethan's eyes glistened, his throat tight. "I didn't know," he whispered. "She wrote that note the night before she disappeared," Clara said, her voice trembling. "Did you know your mother vanished after the diner, closed for good?" He froze. "What?" "She came by one evening. My mom said she looked scared, like someone was following her. And then she never came back." Ethan's face turned pale. His voice, usually steady and careful, shook when he spoke. "I was told she left us. I thought she ran away." Clara shook her head slowly. "No, she didn't run. She was running from someone." And in that moment, the past became more than memory. It became a wound, freshly opened and bleeding truth. Ethan rose to his feet, eyes dark and distant. "My father." Clara said nothing. She didn't have to. The weight of that possibility said everything. "I used to think he was just ruthless in business," Ethan said, pacing, his voice low. "But there were rumors. People said deals went missing, people went missing. I never wanted to believe it." He turned to her suddenly. "Do you think he—" "I don't know," she interrupted, though her voice wavered. "But she left a warning. She wrote it where she knew someone like me would find it one day." Ethan pressed a hand to his face, a sound escaping his throat that was somewhere between a sob and a curse. "She died trying to make it right," he murmured. "And I spent my life cleaning up his messes without even knowing how deep they went." Clara stepped closer, her anger softening into something like pity. "You're not him," she said quietly. "But if what you're saying is true, then this diner isn't just about land or forgiveness anymore. It's about justice." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I'll find out what really happened to her. I owe both our mothers that." Her eyes searched his face, wary, uncertain, but drawn by something unspoken. "Then we do it together," she said. "If my mother trusted yours enough to warn her, maybe it's our turn to finish what they started." For the first time, Ethan looked at her not as a victim or a rival, but as an equal, someone who carried the same scars. And as thunder rolled outside, both of them knew they were standing at the beginning of something much darker than either had imagined. The next morning, sunlight crept through the clouds, turning the rain-soaked streets into a mirror of gold. Clara sat across from Ethan at the diner's front booth, the same one where their mothers had once shared secrets and coffee. A pile of old documents lay between them, bank records, deeds, and newspaper clippings, all dating back nearly 3 decades. Neither had slept much. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was heavy, filled with questions neither dared to ask. Clara finally broke it. "If we're going to dig this up, we do it right. No more half-truths, no more pretending." Ethan nodded. "Agreed. My father kept everything. Contracts, letters, even personal notes. His office is still intact at the estate." Her eyes sharpened. "Then that's where we start." They drove in tense silence, the road winding through misty hills toward a mansion that seemed to rise from the fog like a ghost. The Hayes estate, tall gates, ivy-covered stone, windows that looked more like watchful eyes than glass. Ethan's grip on the wheel tightened the closer they got. "I haven't been here since the funeral," he murmured. Clara glanced at him. "You think we'll find something?" "I think he kept records of everything he wanted to control," Ethan said, his tone bitter. "And everyone." The car rolled to a stop at the gates. The air felt colder here, heavier, like the ground itself remembered. Clara shivered, watching as the gates creaked open automatically, slow and reluctant. Inside, the house was a shrine to arrogance. Polished marble floors, portraits staring down from the walls, each one colder than the last. Ethan moved with caution, his voice low. He used to say power was just another form of love, the only kind that lasts. Clara's jaw tightened. Sounds like something a man would say before he destroys everything he touches. They reached the study, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound books and a massive oak desk in the center. Ethan approached it like it might explode. "He used to sit here for hours," he whispered. "Every deal, every lie, every life started here." Clara looked at the drawers. "Then maybe it's where it ends." They began searching, pulling open folders, flipping through files yellowed with age. After nearly an hour, Clara found a locked drawer at the bottom. "Of course," she muttered. "The good stuff's always hidden." Ethan retrieved a small brass key from the drawer above, one she hadn't even noticed. He kept it close, he said. "Old habits." The lock clicked open. Inside were letters, hundreds of them, bundled neatly with twine, each one addressed to Margaret Hayes. Ethan's face went pale. He lifted one envelope, trembling slightly, and unfolded the paper. The handwriting was elegant but cold. "You disobeyed me. You endangered everything I built. If you walk into that diner again, I'll end it." Clara's heart stopped. He looked at her, his voice cracking. "My father threatened my mother because of your family." The revelation hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Ethan's jaw clenched, his breath shaky. "He killed her," he whispered. "He killed her because she tried to protect your mother." Clara reached for his arm, but he pulled away, collapsing into the leather chair, the letter still trembling in his hand. The truth was poison, old and potent. Neither of them spoke for what felt like forever. The only sound was the faint tick of the grandfather clock behind them. Finally, Clara whispered, "Then this diner. It's more than a legacy. It's a crime scene that never saw justice." Ethan looked up slowly, eyes red. "Not yet," he said. And in that single moment, vengeance and redemption became the same road. By the time they left the estate, the sky had turned the color of steel, silent, heavy, waiting. Neither of them spoke on the drive back. Ethan's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Clara kept staring out the window, replaying every moment. The letters, the warnings, the hatred that still lingered in ink. When they reached the diner, the neon sign flickered weakly, its hum cutting through the fog like a heartbeat. Inside, the world felt different, smaller somehow, like the air itself had learned to keep secrets. Clara sank into the corner booth while Ethan set the letters down on the table, careful as if they were explosives. He finally spoke, his voice barely more than a whisper. "If we make this public, my family name will be ruined." Clara's eyes flashed with anger. "Your family name should be ruined, Ethan. It's built on what your father did to mine." He looked at her, guilt written across his face. "And yours shouldn't have to pay the price for my bloodline." She leaned forward, fire in her voice. "This isn't about blood. It's about truth. People like your father, they count on silence." Ethan swallowed hard, his shoulders slumping. "You think I don't know that? I've lived my whole life cleaning up his messes, trying to prove I wasn't him." The rain began again outside, soft but relentless, as if echoing their tension. Clara softened slightly. "Then help me finish what he started. Not for him, but for the people he destroyed." He nodded slowly. "All right, we'll do it together. But we need proof that ties him directly to her death." That night, they combed through the letters again, looking for anything that might connect Richard Hayes to something tangible. Most were veiled threats, reminders of control, of fear. But one, dated 2 days after Margaret's disappearance, caught Clara's attention. It read simply, "The property is clean. The problem was handled." The words chilled her. She looked up at Ethan, her face pale. This is him admitting it. Ethan frowned. "It's not enough. It's vague. We need something solid. A location, a name, anything." Clara turned the paper over. There, scribbled faintly in the corner, were 3 words: Raven Hill Quarry. Ethan's heart stopped. That place, it's been closed for years. Clara's voice was trembling. Do you think? He shook his head quickly. I don't want to think it. But if he buried something out there? The silence between them stretched like a wire ready to snap. Finally, Clara stood, grabbing her coat again. Then we're going. Ethan blinked. Now? It's the middle of the night. She met his eyes, steady and cold. Your father did his worst in the dark. Maybe that's where we'll find the truth. Ethan hesitated, then nodded, reaching for his keys. All right, but whatever we find out there, it could change everything. Clara whispered as she stepped into the rain. That's the point. The road to Raven Hill wound through miles of forest, narrow and dark, with fog that swallowed the headlights. Neither Clara nor Ethan spoke. The hum of the car engine was the only sound, low and nervous, like the world itself was holding its breath. When they finally reached the gate, the sign was barely visible through the mist. Raven Hill Quarry, closed since 1998. The air was colder here, biting through their coats. The place felt abandoned, but not empty. Ethan parked by the old fence and shut off the engine. For a moment, they just sat there, listening to the rain ticking on the windshield. Clara's hands shook as she opened the door. This is where she disappeared, she whispered. Ethan nodded once. Then this is where we find her. The quarry loomed like a giant scar on the earth. Cliffs jagged, machinery rusted, puddles reflecting a bruised sky. Their flashlights cut narrow tunnels through the dark as they moved down the winding path. Every sound, a rock slipping, a gust of wind, felt like footsteps too close behind. Ethan stopped suddenly, pointing to the ground. There, see that? Clara followed his beam. Faint tire marks, fresh ones, leading deeper into the site. Her voice trembled. Someone's been here recently. Ethan's jaw tightened. Then we're not the only ones looking for the truth. They followed the tracks toward the heart of the quarry, where a rusted shack leaned against the cliffside. The door hung slightly open, creaking in the wind. Inside, the smell of oil and dust filled the air. Old tools, broken crates, and a single metal locker stood in the corner. Ethan opened it carefully, half expecting rats or worse. Instead, a single box sat on the top shelf, labeled MH. Clara's breath caught. Margaret Hayes. Ethan's hand trembled as he pulled it down and opened it. Inside were photographs, newspaper clippings, and, buried beneath them, a small silver bracelet, tarnished but intact. Clara covered her mouth, tears forming. That's hers. My mother said she wore it every day. Ethan stared at the bracelet, silent, his throat tight. Then she was here. He pulled out one of the photos, a grainy shot of the quarry itself, taken at night. In the corner, 2 figures stood near a truck. One was unmistakably his father. The other was a woman, smaller, face turned away, wearing the same bracelet now in his hand. Clara felt her stomach twist. She never left town, Ethan. She never had the chance. The horror of it hit them both at once. His father had buried more than just secrets here. And somewhere in the dark, that truth was still watching. Suddenly, the distant crunch of gravel broke the silence. Ethan's head snapped up. We're not alone. Clara's flashlight flickered over the quarry edge. A pair of headlights glowed faintly through the fog, moving toward them. She grabbed Ethan's arm. We have to go. But before they could move, a deep voice echoed across the stone walls, cold, deliberate, and familiar. I told you to leave the past buried. Ethan froze. The voice was his uncle's, Richard Hayes' brother. And in that moment, both of them realized the past hadn't stayed dead. It had been waiting. The fog thickened until the quarry looked like a graveyard made of stone. Ethan pulled Clara behind an old truck, pressing a finger to his lips. Through the haze, a figure emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, his voice echoing against the rock walls. I warned you both, the man said, stepping into the beam of their flashlight. His face came into focus, Leonard Hayes, Ethan's uncle, with eyes that mirrored his brother's cruelty. He wore a long coat, the kind that flapped like wings in the wind, and held something small and metallic in his hand, a gun. Ethan stepped forward cautiously. Uncle Leonard, you knew. Leonard's smirk was thin, cold. Knew? Boy, I fixed what your father couldn't. Clara's stomach twisted. You helped cover up Margaret's death, didn't you? Leonard laughed, the sound echoing across the quarry. Your mother's friend made mistakes. She thought she could expose Richard. But you can't expose a man who owns the ground you stand on. Ethan's voice was shaking now, a mix of rage and disbelief. You killed her. Leonard tilted his head, almost curious. No, nephew. Your father did that. I just cleaned up the mess. Someone had to protect the family name. Clara's heart pounded in her chest. You call that protection? You buried an innocent woman in the dirt. He turned to her, eyes narrowing. And if you don't leave it buried, I'll put you right beside her. Ethan took a step forward, his hands trembling but his voice steady. You're done hiding, uncle. The truth is out now. Leonard raised the gun, his expression hard. You think anyone cares? Your father's legacy built this town. They'll never believe you. Clara's eyes darted to the box in Ethan's hands. We have the letters. The photos. Proof. Leonard smiled faintly. Then I guess you'll have to die holding them. Before he could aim, Ethan lunged. The gun went off, a deafening crack splitting the air. Clara screamed, diving behind the crate as the shot echoed off the quarry walls. When she looked up, Ethan had tackled Leonard to the ground, both men struggling in the mud. The weapon slid across the gravel, landing near Clara's feet. For a split second, time froze. Rain, wind, heartbeats, everything caught in that breath between choices. Leonard pushed Ethan down, fists slamming against his chest. You're weak, he snarled. Just like your mother. Clara's hands shook as she grabbed the gun. Her voice trembled. Stop. Leonard turned, eyes wild. And for the first time she saw what power really looked like. Desperate, cornered, afraid. Ethan struggled beneath him, gasping. Clara, don't. But she didn't hesitate. The shot ripped through the fog, silencing everything. Leonard fell back, a look of shock frozen on his face. Ethan sat up slowly, chest heaving, staring at his uncle's lifeless body. Rain fell harder now, washing the blood into the dirt. Clara dropped the gun, her whole body shaking. I didn't mean to. Ethan reached her, pulling her close. You did what you had to do. For a long moment, they just stood there, two broken souls surrounded by the ghosts of their parents' sins. Then Clara whispered, Now we know what really happened. But who's going to believe us? Ethan looked at the box still clutched in his hand. We don't need belief, he said quietly. We have proof. And somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, not as a warning, but as a reckoning. The drive back from Raven Hill felt endless. Neither of them spoke. The wipers brushed against the windshield in slow, hypnotic arcs, the rhythmic sound filling the silence between them. Ethan's hands were stiff on the wheel, his knuckles pale. Clara sat motionless in the passenger seat, still feeling the cold metal of the gun against her skin even though it was long gone, buried under rain and earth. Her voice finally broke through the hum of the storm. Do you think they'll believe us? Ethan didn't answer right away. His jaw flexed as if the words hurt to form. I don't know, he said quietly. But we have to try. She nodded faintly, staring out the window. The rain blurred the road ahead into streaks of silver and gray, like the world itself didn't want to look back. By the time they reached town, dawn was bleeding through the clouds, pale and fragile. The diner stood silent under the first light, a flickering refuge in a world that had just changed forever. Clara pushed open the door, and the bell chimed softly, like an old friend trying to comfort her. Ethan followed, carrying the box of evidence in both hands as though it were something holy. They set it on the counter beside the coffee machine, the same place her mother once poured endless cups for strangers. Clara whispered, It feels wrong, bringing it here. Ethan shook his head. No, this is where it began. It should be where it ends. They spread out the contents of the box, the letters, the photographs, the bracelet. Each piece of paper, each faded image, was a ghost whispering truth into the quiet. Ethan traced a finger over his mother's handwriting, his expression softening with something like grief mixed with clarity. She wasn't running from us, he murmured. She was running to something better, to people who still believed in right and wrong. Clara reached across the counter, her fingers brushing his. And she paid for it. He looked up at her, eyes heavy but calm. Then maybe it's time her story, both of theirs, gets told. She nodded. We go to the police first. Then the press. No more shadows. But as they began gathering everything into folders, a car engine roared outside. Clara's eyes darted toward the window, heart racing. Who could that be? Ethan froze, then slowly walked to the blinds. A sleek black sedan had parked across the street. A man in a dark coat stood beside it, talking on a phone, calm, composed, watching the diner. Clara's stomach dropped. Please tell me that's not. It's not Leonard. Ethan interrupted, though his voice didn't sound convinced. But someone sent him. He turned to her, his face pale. They're not done covering this up. Clara clenched her jaw. Then neither are we. Ethan met her gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. The story wasn't over, not even close. He took a deep breath, grabbing the box again. We go public. Today. No time to wait. Clara followed him to the door, rain already starting to fall again. The man across the street looked up, meeting their eyes, expressionless, cold. Ethan leaned close to her, his voice low and steady. My father built an empire on fear. Let's tear it down with truth. And as they stepped into the rain together, the dawn behind them broke brighter, thin, fierce, and unrelenting. For the first time, Clara felt something that had eluded her all her life. The taste of justice beginning to rise. By mid-morning, the diner was no longer just a diner. It had become a command post. Stacks of papers covered the counter. Photocopies of the letters, photos of the quarry, the newspaper clippings with Richard Hayes' face printed in faded ink. Clara's hands shook as she hit send on an email addressed to the Chronicle, the biggest paper in the county. Subject line, evidence of Hayes' family cover-up, urgent. She attached everything. The letters, photos, even a voice memo Ethan recorded confessing what they'd found. When she pressed send, it felt like pulling a trigger all over again. Ethan was pacing behind her, the phone to his ear. Detective Ramos, please, I need to speak to you now. No, this isn't about money. It's about murder. Outside, the rain had stopped. The quiet before chaos. Clara poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs, her movements mechanical, her thoughts racing. Do you think they'll actually print it? She asked, voice low. Ethan leaned against the counter, exhausted. If they don't, someone else will. The truth's out now. It's not just ours anymore. She took a sip, trying to ignore the tremor in her hands. Then why does it feel like we just lit a match in a room full of gasoline? Ethan gave a hollow smile. Because that's exactly what we did. They stood there for a moment, 2 unlikely allies watching the storm they'd started begin to build again. The first call came an hour later. A journalist from the Chronicle, skeptical but intrigued. She'd seen the photos, the handwriting, the timeline. She wanted an in-person interview and promised protection if things got ugly. Clara hesitated. What do you mean ugly? The journalist's voice softened. The Hayes name still carries power, Miss Ward. When you threaten old money, it threatens back. Ethan hung up his call and met Clara's eyes. He'd heard it too. They'll come for us, he said. Legally, financially, maybe worse. Clara straightened, her chin lifting. Then let them. My mother faced worse than this, and she never ran. By noon, word had already spread through town. People trickled into the diner, not for food, but for answers. They came with whispers, old rumors, memories they'd buried along with their fear. A retired foreman said he'd seen Leonard at the quarry years ago, carrying something heavy with 2 men who weren't from around here. A waitress from another cafe confessed she used to serve Richard Hayes every Thursday, until one day he stopped showing up and she never saw Margaret again. Piece by piece, the puzzle formed itself. The town, once silenced by power, was beginning to speak. And for the first time, Clara felt something she hadn't dared to before. Hope that the truth might actually be louder than fear. Ethan watched it all unfold from the corner booth, his expression unreadable. To anyone else, he looked calm, but Clara could see the storm behind his eyes. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. You know what's going to happen now, don't you? Clara nodded. They'll fight back. He shook his head. No, they'll rewrite it. That's what people like my father always did. They turned the truth into rumor, and rumor into nothing. Clara met his gaze steadily. Then we don't give them that chance. We tell everything. Every last word. Outside, thunder rumbled again. Not from the sky, but from the sound of engines pulling up. 2 black cars. Unmarked. And the men stepping out weren't reporters. The sound of car doors slamming echoed through the wet street like gunfire. Clara froze mid-sentence, the pen dropping from her hand. Ethan stood slowly, his eyes on the window. 2 men stepped out of the black sedans, suits sharp, expressions sharper. One was tall and lean, his hair slicked back. The other, broader, with a scar cutting down his jaw like an exclamation mark. They didn't look like lawyers. They looked like men who cleaned up the kind of messes no one wanted found. Ethan's voice dropped, calm but tight. They're not police. Clara's heart thudded. Then what are they? He didn't take his eyes off them. Reminders of how deep this goes. The bell above the door jingled, too gentle a sound for what followed. The taller man entered first, his shoes clicking on the tile. The other stayed near the door, scanning the diner like a predator sizing up its prey. "Miss Ward," the tall one said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "And Mr. Hayes, we've been looking for you." Clara's stomach turned. "Who sent you?" He ignored her question, turning to Ethan instead. "Your father built something great. We're here to make sure his legacy isn't tarnished." Ethan clenched his fists. "You mean you're here to shut us up?" The man's grin widened. "Call it crisis management." Clara stepped closer to Ethan, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "You're too late. The story's already out." The scarred man at the door chuckled, a deep, cruel sound. "That's cute," he said. "You really think an email is all it takes to bring down the Hayes family?" Ethan moved slightly in front of her, his posture protective but calm. "You can't stop the press. The evidence is already with them." The tall man tilted his head, almost amused. "Evidence can disappear. Files get lost. Accidents happen, especially to people who dig where they shouldn't." He leaned forward, lowering his voice to a whisper only Clara could hear. "Like your mother." The words hit her like ice water. She flinched, rage flooding her veins. Before Ethan could react, Clara slapped the man across the face, hard enough to leave a mark. His smile vanished. The diner fell silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the slow drip of rain from the awning outside. Ethan stepped forward. "You should leave. Now." The scarred man reached inside his coat, but the taller one stopped him with a raised hand. "Not here," he said quietly. "Too public." He straightened his jacket, adjusting his tie as if nothing had happened. "We'll be in touch, Mr. Hayes. I suggest you reconsider what loyalty means before it's too late." He turned, heading toward the door. The other man lingered for a moment, smirking at Clara. "You've got fire. Shame it's going to burn you." Then they were gone, engines roaring, taillights vanishing into the mist. Clara stood frozen, her hand still shaking from the slap. "They know everything," she whispered. Ethan locked the door and drew the blinds. "Then we don't have much time." He turned to her, eyes blazing. "We finish this tonight. If they want to silence us, they'll have to do it in front of everyone." Clara nodded slowly. "Live broadcast." He grinned faintly, the first real spark of defiance in his eyes. "Exactly. We tell the story, uncut, undeniable." And as thunder rolled again, louder than before, they began setting up the cameras. The war for truth had officially gone live. The storm outside returned with a vengeance, wind howling through the streets like a warning. Inside the diner, the lights flickered, the neon sign casting a red pulse across the rain-slicked windows. Ethan adjusted the tripod, his fingers trembling slightly as he fixed the camera angle. Clara tested the mic, her reflection staring back from the laptop screen. "Pale, determined, unbreakable," she whispered. "Once we go live, there's no turning back." Ethan looked up at her, eyes tired but fierce. "We already crossed that line at the quarry." The clock above the counter ticked to midnight. The world outside slept, but inside that diner, truth was about to wake up. He hit the live button. The screen glowed red. "Good evening," Clara began, her voice steady though her heart pounded in her ears. "This isn't a show. This isn't gossip. This is the story our town was never supposed to hear." She glanced at Ethan beside her, who held up one of the letters. The camera zoomed in on the signature, Richard Hayes. For decades, the Hayes family built this community, but they also buried its sins. My mother, Caroline Ward, and Ethan's mother, Margaret Hayes, tried to expose it. One disappeared. One was silenced. She took a breath, the weight of years pressing on her chest. "Tonight, we show you why." Ethan stepped in next, his voice trembling but clear. "My father, Richard Hayes, built his empire by stealing land, threatening lives, and destroying anyone who stood in his way. My uncle Leonard helped cover up the worst of it, including the death of my mother." He paused, his throat tight. "We have proof. Letters, photos, even the site where she was buried." He lifted one of the photos, showing the quarry, the bracelet, the signatures. "People told us to keep quiet. They threatened us. They sent men to stop us. But silence is how monsters survive. Not anymore. The camera caught every word, every tear, every tremor in their voices. Raw, human, real. And thousands of people, across phones and screens, began to watch. Within minutes, the view count exploded. Comments flooded in, disbelief, outrage, horror. Is this real? I knew it. They need protection. Clara's voice cracked only once, when she held up her mother's recipe book. This belonged to my mom. Inside it, we found a message from Margaret Hayes, Ethan's mother, warning her about Richard. She opened to the page with the faded handwriting, zooming in on the words that changed everything. He's gone too far. If I don't make it home, tell the truth. For a moment, the world watching went silent. A collective breath caught between grief and fury. Ethan whispered, almost to himself, she finally made it home. But then, a flicker. The lights dimmed. The live stream lagged, the image glitching. Clara's pulse spiked. What's happening? Ethan's laptop screen flashed. Connection interrupted. He slammed the table. They're trying to cut the feed. Clara scrambled to her phone, hitting the hotspot. Switched to mobile, backup stream. He reconnected, breathless. The screen returned, shaky but alive. Nice try, she muttered, glaring toward the dark window. You can't kill the truth twice. But outside, through the rain-streaked glass, two headlights reappeared. And this time, they didn't turn away. The headlights outside burned brighter, cutting through the rain like knives. Clara's pulse hammered in her chest as the camera's red light blinked steadily. Still live, still streaming. Ethan, she whispered, but he was already moving toward the door. The crowd watching online, now tens of thousands, could see it all. Two figures stepping out of the diner, soaked in rain and truth, facing the oncoming danger. The door creaked open. The same men from earlier stepped inside. The tall one, calm and venomous, and the scarred one, tense, one hand inside his coat. Quite the audience you've gathered, the tall man said, glancing at the glowing camera. You really enjoy attention, don't you, Mr. Hayes? Ethan's voice was low, sharp as glass. You're live. Every word you say, every threat, is being recorded. The man smirked. Oh, I know. He turned to the camera, leaning closer. Viewers, you should remember, there's always more than one side to a story. Clara's anger ignited. And yours is written in blood. The chat exploded, messages racing across the screen. Who are they? Call the police. This is real. Ethan stepped forward, blocking Clara slightly. You won't touch her. The tall man shrugged. Touch her? No. But the world you just set on fire. You think it's going to save you. His eyes flicked to the camera again. Empires don't fall from truth. They fall from control. And you just lost yours. Then, without warning, the scarred man lunged forward and smashed the laptop to the floor. The screen went black. Clara screamed, backing toward the counter as sparks hissed from the broken device. Ethan tackled the scarred man, both of them crashing into a table. Coffee cups shattered. The neon sign outside flickered violently. The tall man stepped toward Clara, but she grabbed the nearest thing she could, a metal tray, and swung. It cracked across his jaw, sending him stumbling back. Stay down, she shouted, her voice raw, shaking. Ethan grunted as he forced the other man against the wall. Clara, get out. But she didn't move. She snatched her phone, holding it high. We're still live. The camera app was recording, broadcasting again on mobile. The world was watching every second of it. The tall man saw the phone and lunged. Clara dodged, slipping on spilled coffee, the phone clattering across the floor. He dove for it, but Ethan was faster. He grabbed the man by the collar and slammed him against the counter. You're done, Ethan shouted, his voice cracking. Rain poured through the open door, thunder booming outside. The scarred man crawled toward the exit, blood dripping from his nose. The tall one spat. You think this changes anything? The people you're fighting, they own the police, the courts, the papers. Ethan leaned closer, fury trembling through his words. Maybe, but they don't own the truth. Clara retrieved her phone, breathless, and turned it toward his face. Say that again, she whispered. And Ethan did, for the world to hear. The flashing lights of police cruisers cut through the downpour like strobe lights in a nightmare. Sirens wailed closer, the storm's thunder swallowed by the chaos of engines, radios, and shouted commands. Clara still held the phone up, trembling, drenched, but recording, the screen showing thousands watching live. Ethan stood beside her, chest heaving, bruised from the fight. The tall man and his scarred partner were pinned by the counter, hands half raised as the first officers burst through the door. "Police! Nobody move!" an officer shouted, flashlight beams slicing through the smoke and rain mist. But the moment the cops saw Ethan's face, something shifted. Hesitation. Recognition. One of them muttered under his breath, "Hayes? What the hell is going on here?" Clara didn't wait. "They attacked us. They tried to destroy the evidence." The tall man smiled despite the cuffs tightening on his wrists. "Careful, Miss Ward. You're accusing very powerful people." Ethan turned to the nearest officer, voice raw. "They're covering up murders. My father, my entire family, has blood on their hands." The officer hesitated, then looked at Clara's phone, the live stream still rolling. The comments were flooding in. "Arrest them. We're watching. Don't let them walk." Public pressure had arrived before backup did. The officer's tone hardened. "Everyone down. We'll sort this at the station." The tall man's smile faltered for the first time. Outside, the parking lot flooded with flashing red and blue. Reporters were already arriving, word spreading faster than the storm. Clara sat on the diner's steps, soaked to the bone, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. Ethan sat beside her, staring at the sky as if the rain could wash away decades of lies. "They'll still try to bury it," he said quietly. "Money buys silence." "Not tonight," Clara whispered. "Not anymore." She turned her phone toward the camera again, face streaked with rain and tears. "You saw everything. Don't let them rewrite it. Don't let them hide again." Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of truth breaking free. One officer approached cautiously. "Miss Ward, we need you both for statements." Clara nodded, but before she stood, she looked back at the diner, at the shattered glass, the overturned tables, the broken laptop sparking faintly in the corner. It was chaos, but it was their chaos, proof that the truth had finally fought back. Ethan reached out and took her hand. "For what it's worth," he said softly, "my mother would have been proud of you." Clara looked at him, tears catching in the glow of police lights. "Then maybe she's finally resting." They walked toward the squad cars, shoulders touching. Two people bound not by fate, but by what they refused to forget. As they drove away, the live stream replayed across countless screens. Clips went viral. Hashtags exploded. Major news outlets picked it up before dawn. The diner expose. The Hayes scandal. Truth served cold. In homes, offices, and quiet rooms, people watched Clara's trembling hand hold a phone steady against corruption and believed. The world had seen enough lies. And as morning broke over the drenched streets, the first sunlight hit the diner's cracked neon sign, still buzzing faintly, open. Because now, the truth finally was. 3 weeks later, the diner was quiet again, but it wasn't the same. The cracked neon sign had been repaired, glowing soft blue instead of red. The walls still carried faint stains from that night, but now, framed photographs of smiling faces lined them. People from town, from across the country, who'd come to show support. A hand-painted sign on the window read, "Truth served here." Clara poured coffee into a mug, her reflection shimmering in the dark liquid. No camera crews, no shouting, no chaos, just the hum of a refrigerator and the faint sound of rain outside. But in that silence, she felt something new, peace. Ethan pushed through the door, wearing a worn jacket, hair damp from the drizzle. "You're open early," he said, smiling faintly. Clara looked up, surprised. "Couldn't sleep. The quiet feels strange." He took a seat at the counter, tapping the wood with his fingers. "Reporters still camped outside my dad's estate. He's officially under investigation." "Good," she said, sliding him a mug. "About time someone knocked on that door." Ethan sipped, then sighed. "The board's collapsing. People are resigning. But it's not over. They'll try to rebuild, with new faces, same poison." Clara leaned forward, eyes steady. "Then we keep watching. The truth doesn't clock out." He chuckled softly, though there was sadness in it. "I used to think silence was safety," he said. "Now I see it was just a slow death." Clara tilted her head. "Your mother knew that. So did mine." They both looked toward the photo on the wall. Two women, side by side in an old picture, laughing in front of the diner decades earlier. Neither had survived to see what their children had done, but somehow, it felt like they were there. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a washed-clean world. Ethan said quietly, "Sometimes I wish I could ask her what to do next." Clara smiled faintly. "She already told you. You just listened too late." A bell chimed, the first customer of the morning. A little boy and his mother stepped inside, shaking off the rain. The woman smiled nervously, whispering, "Are you Clara Ward?" Clara nodded, unsure. The woman's eyes softened. "I watched your stream that night. You save people you'll never meet." "Thank you." She pressed a folded note onto the counter. Not money, but a photo. Clara unfolded it, heart tightening. It was her mother, years younger, serving a cup of coffee to a woman who looked exactly like Ethan's mother. On the back, written in faded ink, "For our children, so they'll know." Ethan's voice broke the silence. They knew this day would come. Clara looked up at him, her eyes wet but shining. "Then let's make sure it was worth it." He smiled, quiet and real, the kind that comes after surviving something impossible. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks, spilling golden light through the diner windows. It touched the old photo, the new sign, their faces, and for a fleeting moment, everything felt healed. The world had finally seen what it tried to ignore. The waitress and the realtor, two people bound by guilt, blood, and truth, had finished the story their mothers began. And for the first time in years, they both felt free. 5 years later, the once-forgotten diner had become something else entirely. The Truth Diner stood proud on the same cracked street corner, freshly painted, filled with laughter, and surrounded by a small garden where weeds used to grow. Tourists came from across the country just to sit in one of its old booths, where the air seemed to hum with the echoes of that infamous night. A bronze plaque on the wall read, "Dedicated to those who refuse to stay silent." Inside, photographs lined every inch of the space, not of celebrities or politicians, but of ordinary people who had spoken up, fought back, and rebuilt their lives. The smell of coffee and cinnamon filled the air, simple, familiar, and honest. Clara moved through the tables with calm confidence. She wasn't the same waitress anymore. Her hair was a little grayer, her eyes a little softer, but her smile was stronger. People still recognized her. Some asked for pictures, others just said thank you. And though she'd long stopped chasing fame, her story had become something bigger, a movement about truth, redemption, and courage. The live stream that had once terrified her was now studied in journalism schools and shared in documentaries. Every time she heard her name mentioned on TV, she'd quietly smile and think, it was never about me. It was about us. The people who refused to look away. A familiar sound pulled her from her thoughts, the jingling of the diner's front door. Ethan walked in, his coat draped over one arm, his expression calm but reflective. He had built a small legal foundation using the settlement money, helping whistleblowers and workers who faced injustice. Every few weeks, he stopped by for coffee. They didn't need to talk much. Silence between them was now comfortable. "Morning," he said softly, sliding onto his usual stool. "Morning," Clara replied with a knowing smile, pouring his cup without asking. They had become the quiet guardians of what their mothers began. As the morning rush began, a teenager walked up to the counter, holding a camera nervously. "Miss Ward," he asked, voice shaking. "I'm doing a project about people who changed the world. My teacher said you were one of them." Clara blinked, then laughed softly. "Oh, honey, I just told the truth." Ethan leaned in, his voice gentle. "And that's exactly how the world changes." The boy smiled, snapping a picture. "Can I quote you on that?" Clara grinned. "Only if you order pancakes first." The whole diner chuckled, the warmth in the room thicker than the smell of syrup and coffee. Later that afternoon, Clara stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. The golden hour sun painted the diner's windows like stained glass. In the reflection, she saw herself standing next to Ethan, their shadows framed beneath the glowing sign, Truth Diner. For a moment, she thought she saw two other figures, faint, ghostly, their mothers, standing behind them, proud. The wind carried the smell of rain, as if the past were still alive somewhere, watching over them. Clara whispered, "We did it, Mom." And as the light faded, she turned back inside, where laughter, hope, and coffee were still being served. Because in that little diner, the truth never closed. 10 years had passed since that night that changed everything. The world outside had shifted. Faster, louder, sometimes crueler. But inside the Truth Diner, time moved differently. Every day at sunrise, the neon sign flickered to life, humming softly as the scent of fresh coffee drifted into the morning air. What began as a small act of defiance had turned into a symbol of resistance. People traveled from distant cities and even other countries, not for the food, but for what the place represented: courage. There were news articles, documentaries, even a film adaptation, yet none captured the quiet strength that still lived within those four walls. And at the heart of it all, Clara remained, still serving truth with every plate. She kept a journal now, tucked beneath the counter beside an old coffee tin filled with letters. Each one came from someone who had watched her story years ago. Teachers, parents, teenagers, all saying the same thing. "You gave me the courage to speak up." Sometimes, when the diner was empty, she would sit by the window and read them aloud, one by one. Ethan had moved to another city, running his foundation full-time, but they still spoke often. He called every Sunday morning at exactly 8 o'clock. Always the same greeting. "You still burning the bacon, Clara?" And she would laugh, pretending to be offended. "Only for you, counselor." One morning, as the first snow of the season began to fall, a black car pulled up outside. A woman stepped out, wearing a sleek coat and holding a camera. She looked nervous, young, determined. She pushed open the door, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Are you Clara Ward?" Clara wiped her hands on a towel and smiled. "Depends who's asking." The woman hesitated. "My name's Natalie Hayes. I think you knew my uncle." Clara froze, her heart skipping a beat. "Hayes," she whispered. The name rolled through her memory like thunder from a long-dead storm. Ethan's last name. The family name that once symbolized everything corrupt. Natalie nodded. "My father told me stories about what happened, about how you helped him." She placed a small envelope on the counter. "He wanted you to have this. Said it was long overdue." Clara opened it carefully. Inside was a faded photo of Ethan standing in front of the rebuilt diner, smiling, holding a small plaque. Beneath it, a note in his handwriting read, "Truth isn't just what we expose. It's what we keep alive." Clara's eyes misted over. "He never changed that line," she said softly. Natalie smiled gently. "He says this place gave him his life back." For a moment, the two women stood there in silence, past and future crossing paths in the warm glow of the diner's lights. Later, when Natalie left, Clara placed the photo beside the others on the wall. The corner of her mouth lifted as she whispered, "Guess you're still serving truth, Ethan." Outside, the snow thickened, painting the streets white and quiet. Clara returned to her spot behind the counter, refilling coffee for the handful of customers still chatting softly. Her movements were slower now, graceful, like someone who had made peace with every scar life had left behind. And on the wall behind her, beneath all the photos and news clippings, hung a new framed sign. It read simply, "The truth costs everything, but silence costs more." That was the diner's new motto, chosen by Clara herself. The snow had begun to melt into thin silver streams along the pavement when the doorbell chimed again. Clara didn't look up at first. Mornings like these were filled with regulars and quiet strangers seeking warmth. But then she heard a familiar voice, lower now, lined with years and miles. "Still serving the strongest coffee on earth, I see." Her hands froze mid-wipe. Slowly, she turned toward the doorway, and there he was. Ethan Hayes. A little older, his beard flecked with gray, his once polished suit replaced by a weathered coat. His eyes, though, hadn't changed. They still carried that same depth, the weight of truth, guilt, and something softer. For a heartbeat, the diner went silent. Clara blinked, uncertain if the moment was real or one of the countless memories that visited her in dreams. Then she smiled, slow and genuine. "You look terrible." Ethan laughed, stepping closer. "Good to see you too." They stood there in the soft hum of the diner, 10 years collapsing into seconds. Finally, Clara motioned toward his old seat at the counter. "Sit down before I decide you're just another ghost from this place." He obeyed, shrugging off his coat. Steam rose from the mug she poured him, curling between them like invisible thread reconnecting the past. After a long sip, he exhaled. "You've turned this place into a temple." "It's just a diner," she said softly, though pride flickered in her voice. "No," he replied. "It's the reason people still believe the truth matters." He slid an envelope across the counter, mirroring the moment Natalie had done weeks before. Clara raised an eyebrow. "If this is another photo, you're going to make me cry again." He shook his head. "Not a photo. A proposal." She hesitated before opening it. Inside were printed documents, official-looking, stamped with a global logo, TruthLink International Foundation. He explained quietly, "We've built something bigger, Clara." Inspired by that night. Journalists, lawyers, teachers, all fighting to protect stories like ours. Clara's eyes softened as she read the mission statement. To defend the voices that refused to stay silent. She looked up. "And you came all this way to what? Recruit your favorite waitress." He smiled faintly. "No, to ask her to lead the next chapter." Her laugh cracked through the quiet. "Me? Ethan, I run a diner, not a movement." But his gaze stayed steady. "You already run one. You just don't charge admission." For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the soft clink of spoons and murmurs of customers filled the space. Finally, Clara leaned on the counter, her tone thoughtful. "You really think we can change the world again?" Ethan's answer came without hesitation. "We already did. Now we teach others how." She smiled, the corners of her eyes glistening. "You haven't changed." "Neither have you," he said softly, still serving truth with a side of sass. They both laughed, and for the first time in years, the diner didn't feel haunted. It felt alive. Outside, the snow had stopped completely, leaving the sky clear and bright. Clara looked toward the window, where her reflection overlapped with his, and whispered, "Then let's start again. One story at a time." A month later, Clara stood in an airport terminal that buzzed with energy, screens flashing destinations, strangers moving in tides, voices overlapping in a dozen languages. She clutched her worn leather bag close, the same one she'd used the night of the storm years ago. It still smelled faintly of coffee and rain. Next to her, Ethan checked his watch, his expression calm but purposeful. "Our flight leaves in 20 minutes. You sure you're ready for this?" Clara smirked. "I faced down corrupt CEOs, assassins, and livestream trolls, Ethan. A conference full of reporters doesn't scare me." He chuckled. "That's exactly what worries me." Together, they walked toward Gate 12, destination, Geneva, Switzerland. The Global Justice and Transparency Summit was being held in a massive glass auditorium overlooking a frozen lake. Banners fluttered outside reading, "TruthLink International, Voices Without Fear." Inside, hundreds of journalists, activists, and officials filled the seats. Cameras flashed, lights hummed, the air thick with anticipation. When Clara and Ethan stepped on stage, applause erupted. Ethan adjusted his mic. 10 years ago, we stood in a diner surrounded by corruption and fear. Today, we stand here to prove that truth doesn't die in the dark. It waits to be served. Clara's voice followed, steady and warm. The truth doesn't need heroes. It needs witnesses, people willing to say, "I saw, and I won't forget." The crowd fell silent, then rose again, louder, unified. After the speech, reporters swarmed around them. One asked, "Miss Ward, did you ever think you'd be standing on a stage like this when you were just a waitress?" Clara smiled. "I still am a waitress. I just serve something stronger than coffee now." Laughter rippled through the crowd, but there was reverence in it too. As they left the hall, Ethan leaned close. "You stole the spotlight again." She shrugged playfully. "You talk numbers. I talk people." They walked into the cold evening air, snowflakes beginning to drift once more. A reminder that every ending was really a beginning in disguise. Later that night, at the hotel balcony overlooking the lake, Clara stood with a steaming cup of tea. The city lights shimmered like reflections of 1,000 untold stories below. Ethan joined her, his voice quieter now. "They offered us funding for expansion. Offices in 4 continents." She didn't look away from the view. "That's good, but promise me something." "Anything," he said. "Never let it become about power. Once truth starts wearing a crown, it forgets who it serves." Ethan nodded slowly. "You really are the conscience of this movement." She smiled. "And you're the muscle. Don't mess it up." Down in the square below, a group of young volunteers held candles, chanting softly, "TruthLink forever. Truth never sleeps." Clara watched them, her heart swelling with both pride and humility. "Look at them," she whispered. "They weren't even born when the storm hit the diner." Ethan smiled beside her. "And yet, they carry your story like gospel." For a long moment, They stood in silence, watching the reflection of firelight on the lake, listening to the echoes of courage reborn. It was no longer about her, or him, or even the past. It was about what they had ignited, a movement built on pain, courage, and conviction. A reminder that truth, once freed, never goes back to sleep. It was midnight in Geneva when the last echoes of applause faded from the summit hall. The streets glowed under soft amber lights, the lake still as glass, reflecting the world as it was, fragile, transparent, beautiful. Clara sat alone in her hotel room, suitcase half-packed, staring at an envelope that had been slipped under her door hours earlier. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate. No return address. She frowned and opened it carefully. Inside was a single black and white photograph. The Truth Diner, decades earlier, surrounded by farmland and empty fields. At the bottom, written in faded ink, "It began here, but it must never end there." She turned the photo over and froze. A familiar crest had been pressed into the paper, the Hayes family seal. Her heart quickened. Ethan's father had died years ago, hadn't he? She reached for her phone, hesitated, then called Ethan anyway. He answered groggily. "Clara? What's wrong?" "Someone left a photo under my door," she said softly. "It's the diner. But there's a message. And your family's crest." Ethan went silent. Finally, he said, "Stay where you are. I'm coming." Minutes later, he was at her door, hair disheveled, eyes sharp with the old instinct of a man who'd seen too much truth buried too deep. He took the photo, studying the handwriting. "This isn't my father's. It's older." "Older?" she echoed. He nodded. "My grandfather built the diner. Before it was yours." Clara's breath caught. "What?" He set the photo down gently. "He owned the land. But after a fire, he rebuilt it. Only he didn't reopen it. He gave it away." She sat slowly, the room spinning. "To who?" Ethan met her gaze, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your grandmother." For a long moment, neither spoke. The truth between them felt too big, too heavy, like history folding in on itself. The diner wasn't just the place where their story ended, it was where it began. Clara pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. So it was never chance. It was legacy. Ethan nodded slowly. "Our families built it together. Maybe they always knew we'd find our way back." Tears welled in her eyes. "And everything that happened, all the pain, all the loss." He took her hand gently. "Was the cost of remembering who we are." The city outside their window shimmered with reflections, each light a memory, each shadow a secret redeemed. Clara exhaled slowly. Then maybe the diner isn't just a symbol of truth. Maybe it's forgiveness made brick and mortar. Ethan smiled faintly. "And maybe it's time to go home." She nodded, quietly, knowing this was the circle closing. 2 weeks later, the Truth Diner stood beneath a golden sunrise. The air was crisp, the sign glowing brighter than ever. Locals gathered outside as Clara and Ethan walked through the door together, the bell chiming like it did the first day they met. Inside, everything looked the same, yet different. The smell of coffee, the hum of life, the peace of knowing the story had come full circle. Clara placed the old photograph in a frame by the counter, right beside the plaque that read, "Truth costs everything, but silence costs more." Ethan stood beside her, hand resting lightly on the counter. "It's beautiful," he said. She smiled. "It's honest." Outside, the wind rustled softly, carrying the smell of rain and the sound of new beginnings. That night, as the last customer left, Clara locked the door and turned off the lights one by one. Only the sign remained, glowing faintly in the darkness, Truth Diner. In the window's reflection, two figures stood together, side by side, watching the glow fade into the night. Not heroes, not martyrs, just two souls who refused to let lies win. And somewhere deep in the quiet of the diner walls, if one listened close enough, it was as if the building itself whispered. They remembered. The screen would fade to black, leaving the faint buzz of neon and the echo of a promise. The truth never dies. It only waits to be found.